My brothers and sisters, today is what is known as Laetare Sunday. It is in the heart of the Lenten journey, and this word laetare, from Latin translated, means rejoice, or to rise up in hope and joy. And so its history is very interesting because it goes back to the early church when people were preparing to come into full communion with the church. So like our candidates and catechumens who are with us today, who have been preparing to receive the sacraments at Easter, in the early church, that process would have taken much longer, not because they weren't as smart as all of you guys, but because they just did a longer process, sometimes 2 or 3 years. So imagine your journey of about 9 months in preparation with us. Now multiply that 4 or 5 times, and that's what would have happened in the early church. And thus, because it was such a long process, they realized it would be good to have a little bit of a pause to encourage the candidates and catechumens on their journey to the home stretch at Easter. And so they'd have a little celebration of joy and hope, Laetare Sunday, in which we celebrate today. Even the rose vestments, rose is a sign of joy and hope in our Christian journey. And so as we rejoice today in our candidates and catechumens who are near the finish line, if you will, of full communion, but then a new beginning in their own lives at Easter, we could ask the question, what do we rejoice in? What do you rejoice in your life today? What are you rejoicing about? Probably many of you would say, I rejoice in my family, my marriage, my vocation. I rejoice in my friendships. I rejoice that God has blessed me with good work. All these things are things to rejoice about. Some of you may be big basketball fans, and in March Madness may be rejoicing that your team has advanced on to the next place of the Final Four. I know that I am not rejoicing today as Purdue is not moving on in that respect, but I know that some of you may be rejoicing about that. Whatever it is that you find to be joyful in your life, or that you rejoice in that brings you hope and joy, could be nothing greater that we would rejoice in today than Jesus Christ and our salvation in and through him and the Holy Church. We rejoice in the hope and joy of the promise of an eternal Easter in which we move towards. We could say that the whole of the spiritual life is on display and unfolds in today's gospel, the story of the blind man who is healed by Christ. His story is our story. His blindness is our blindness. How so? Well, Jesus, the first thing that happens is there's an encounter with Christ. There's an encounter with Jesus himself, with the man born blind. And yes, while this man would have been physically likely blind from his birth, we also know that any time that we hear, particularly in the Gospels, a story of healing, that there is a story also of spiritual healing. And so a metaphor exists that this man would have been also spiritually blind. And we ourselves were all born spiritually blind. We were born with original sin that distorts our vision of the good, that blinds our reality. And so we could relate to the blind man, born blind spiritually. But Jesus' encounter makes a difference, as we know. Jesus is an answer to the darkness, to the blindness. He comes into the world to illuminate the world in which we live. St. Paul says it perfectly in our second reading as he speaks to the Ephesians. Brothers and sisters, you were once darkness, but now you are the light in the Lord. Live as children of the light. You are light in the Lord, within him, within the Savior of the world. And so he illuminates the world, and he illuminates our lives as the light of the world to enlighten our minds, our hearts, and to heal us of spiritual blindness. It's interesting what Jesus does after his initial encounter. Perhaps if we pause, we would think this is quite odd, actually, that he then spits on the ground and he makes this kind of salve or this putty out of the clay, out of the earth. He spits on the ground and makes a paste with his saliva and the soil combined. This is the reality of who Jesus is now. St. Augustine handles this with great grace when he talks about how the spittle is coming from the mouth of God, and so that represents divinity. And of course, the soil is of the earth, and so it represents humanity. And when the two come together, there is then a healing salve that is produced. He creates this salve to place on the man's eyes. That word salve comes from the same root word as Savior. The salve, the Savior, heals the sick man's eyes. He then invites him to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. That word John unpacks for us Siloam means sent, or to be sent. He is sent to the pool to be washed clean. This indeed is another reference to the great sacrament, the sacrament of initiation of baptism, to be washed clean. We, like the blind man, are born blind with original sin, and Jesus encounters us as he did the blind man, and he places his salve on our eyes, on our hearts, on our minds, on our very being, on our souls. And the Savior heals us and cleanses us through the sacrament of holy baptism. Next, it's really interesting how the people respond. If you were there that day and you saw a miracle, you knew this man was blind, you had seen him begging for the needs of his life for years, and now all of a sudden he can see, and he's pronouncing this claim to a miracle, and yet some people reject this. They are opposed to it. Yes, some are probably rejoicing, especially his parents who are so happy and those who are near to him, but some are also pushing back. They're quoting the law. He healed on the Sabbath. One cannot heal on the Sabbath. And so they're rejecting this healing. They're rejecting the miracle. They are opposed. When we are healed through baptism, restored in that great sacrament, we are not the same. We are a new person after the baptism. As St. Paul says, it is now not I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And so, when we are changed, some of you will receive the sacrament of baptism here in just a few weeks, and you will be changed in your life. Some will rejoice. Some have rejoiced over infant baptisms that we've had. In fact, the whole church rejoices when we baptize. Infants or adults, we're also happy. But be assured, there are people in your lives who will not rejoice. Perhaps some of you have already been discouraged to continue in OCIA. For those who are saying, what are you doing? Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to follow that way? We know that once we're healed, once we're grafted to Christ through baptism, once we receive the indelible mark, that Satan will want to have a battle with us. And so there will be opposition. And sometimes people around us will be even opposed to our Christian way of living. Yet, we know that we are made new, grafted to Christ, and the new person has the light of Christ shining within them, so they are a different person. I recall this when I had my reversion back to the church in my young adult years. And I remember in my workplace that over some time, different people that had no idea that I had returned to the church would say things like, "You seem so much more at peace these days. You seem different than you used to be. You seem happier." And all these things were a result of a new man, a reversion back to God and to the faith. And so too, in this great gift of the blind man's healing, they hardly recognize him. And so they're asking, who is this guy? Is that the one? And we know that sometimes, as St. Paul says, that the putting on the new man will make us unrecognizable because of the change, the good change that happens in our lives. As they're kind of questioning then the man, if he's really the one that has been healed, as they come to him and say, "Are you the person that was healed that are now can see?" And he says two very simple words in Greek, ego eime, which translates "I am." Two simple words. In the response, "Are you the one that has been healed?" He says, "I am." Why is this significant? These two simple words and all this big long gospel today. Well, those words reflect, as you probably have recognized, the question of Moses to God. Who shall I say that you are? Who are you? And God's response is, tell them that I am who am. We call him now the great I am. Jesus then, throughout the Gospel of John, uses this language. It's very familiar that he wants people to know that he is God. And so in response to many questions or to his identity, he says, Ego eimi, I am. I am the way, the truth, and the life, he says. I am the good shepherd, he proclaims. I am the bread of life, which comes down from heaven, he exhorts. And Jesus even asked in his passion on the way to the cross by Pilate, are you the King of the Jews? And he says, I am. When we are baptized, we become like God. We are marked by God to become like him. We become like the great I am. Baptism makes us an alter Christus, another Christ living in the world, the light of Christ shining out of us to be Christ for others. This is a powerful gift that is given to us as we consider our own spiritual journey through the sacraments. Today, my brothers and sisters, this one story, we could say, kind of unearths or unpacks the whole Christian journey. Yes, indeed, we were born into original sin, born blind. But Jesus doesn't want to leave us there, and so he encounters us, and he invites us into something more, whether through our parents to be baptized or through our own reason and understanding and faith as adults. He encounters us to heal us through the sacrament of baptism. And while some rejoice in those baptisms, that way of living, that life of Christ here on earth, some will reject that. Satan will get in there and mess around with those who are baptized, trying to get them to move away from God. There will be a battle that we fight, but in the midst of the battle, grafted to Christ, we are strengthened through him. I can do all things through him, says Christ, through St. Paul. And so, it is true that today we recognize that in baptism, we are alter Christus. We are other Christ in the world. We are the light of Christ to others. And so today we rejoice. On Laetare Sunday, we rejoice in that very identity as beloved and adopted sons and daughters of God the Father. And we rejoice in those who are preparing for that fullest identity in their own lives through the sacraments at Easter. May the Easter glory shine for all eternity in our lives as alter Christus, other Christ.